That was pretty good. Warframe has a new event weapon, the Tak Lug, and this thing can blow up entire rooms with just the press of one simple button. However, there are a couple of things that you need to know because otherwise it won't work at all. So, in today's Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about the Tak Lug, how to farm it, which builds work best on it, and how you can unleash its true power potential. As always, a big shout out to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. First of all, let's talk about how you can farm it for yourself, and luckily, this is pretty easy. This weekend, there is another alert on the star map right up here, and this is called Galleon of the Ghouls, Round 2, where you can get this weapon after playing the mission. Once you've finished the mission for the first time, you will receive an inbox message from Counselor Vayhak that gives you the main blueprint for the Tak Lug. However, and that is very important, you need to play the mission multiple times because in order to craft it, you need the blade, the handle, and the guard as well, which you can obtain from further mission runs. Now, at the point of making this video, the event will be still up for around about 2 days, so there is a bit more time for you to get it for yourself. As for the mission itself, this one is actually a pretty darn easy one. Just like last weekend, it's another Grenier ghoul-themed capture mission where you're going to be forced equipped with an ogress, blow everything up, and capture a target. Rinse and repeat. It's very simple. Everybody can do it. You know, enemy level 17-ish, and that is basically all you need to know about it. Just one more quick note, in case you can't make it this weekend and you missed the alert, it's not all too bad. The event will come back one last time, that is the next weekend, and on that weekend you can farm both the Tak Lug as well as last week's Tomcat, so it's all good. And as always, if you could maybe leave a little like for the video, that'd be super nice because it always helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now that you know how you can get the Tak Lug for yourself, let's talk about what this thing even is, what it can do, and why it is so special. First of all, the Tak Lug is a sword-shield combination, and that means it has access to all the sword and shield stances in the game, and in my opinion, best selection here would be of course Final Harbinger because it is a great stance, deals a lot of damage, and force proc slashes on top of the slashes that you're gonna be dealing anyway. That is very, very good, and it also matches the polarity. As for the stats themselves, the crit performance is not all too amazing with 21% at a 1.9 times multiplier. It is not terrible, it is high enough to work with it, but of course it doesn't make us happy either. What does make us happy though is the 31% status chance, meaning we're gonna inflict quite a lot of stuff with it, and also, and that pairs very nicely, the damage distribution is overwhelmingly slash, so we're gonna inflict quite some bleeds with this bad boy, on top of, you know, the force procs from the Final Harbinger stance that you're ideally gonna be using. Now, from the stats alone, this might look like your standard day-to-day sword and shield, however, it has one unique trait, and that is, when you do a heavy attack, you're gonna throw out your shield, and it is gonna force proc blast status effects in a wide AoE. Or at least that's what the effect itself says. In reality though, well, let me just give it to my yesterday's livestream reaction when I first tried it out, because I think this tells you everything you need to know about what I personally thought about it at first. So, that didn't look all that impressive. That's like the Temu version of the pseudo disc. What the heck? Blast in a large area of effect. You see the large area of effect? So yeah, maybe this weapon has a few little issues, and I want to quickly go over it because I want you to know the entire truth, but also I made a mistake in the live stream, and I want to also talk about that real quick. First of all, while yes, you can throw the shield out like a glaive disc and it will deal damage and an AoE, there is a bit of a problem in that you can't aim it up or down. If I aim up, it's still gonna fly horizontally, and if I aim to the ground, it also won't go up or down. In this sense, it is very much different to glaives, which you can essentially throw like a 3-dimensional projectile. Also, in contrast to glaives, this one has much more of a restrictive range, so if you stand too far away from the enemies, you're just not gonna hit anything. However, while these things are definitely downsides that you should know about, it is not all doom and gloom because when I tested it live on stream, there was one critical oversight on my part. See, while for glaive explosions and AoEs, modding for melee range doesn't do anything for the radius, on this weapon here it's fundamentally different because it's technically not an explosion that you're dealing, but you're hitting the enemies with the shield itself that you physically throw out. That is why, on the Tak Lug, you can actually mod for melee range and massively increase the pathetically low base area of effect of your shield throw. With this little fix, the shield now all of a sudden becomes much more viable and can deal some pretty decent damage, as you've also seen in the intro. But now that you know all the nitty-gritty details about the Tak Lug, let's finally talk about how to build it, and here I have multiple builds prepared for you. I want to start out today with a more beginner-focused build with easier to acquire mods, because I think that quite a good chunk of newer players will have probably played the event and are now wondering if this thing is any good and what they can do with it. So let's first take a look at the beginner build, and that here would be it. Pretty simple stuff: pressure point for the base damage, reach for the range, which you definitely want for the shield throw, otherwise it's just not gonna feel good. Organ Shatter for the crit damage, True Steel for the crit chance. This so far is everything pretty nice. Fury for the attack speed, Gladiator Might for even more crit and crit damage. Grineer and Melee Elementalist is what I would personally recommend because this is more of a slash-focused build, and with the faction damage plus Elementalist combination, you're gonna deal quite the devastating slashes. Of course, if you go up against another enemy faction, you would swap this one here out. As for the other two builds, they are more steel path focused and they work actually pretty darn well. The first one I want to talk about is a more normal light attack build where we're also going to go for a lot of status damage and slashes, but we're going to combine that with Tennokai to weave in the occasional shield throw, which is going to deal some nice AoE blast damage on top. Now, this right here would be my personal build suggestion. Of course, Final Harbinger in the stance mods, and then we go for Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds for a lot of crit chance crit damage. We want to keep our multiplier as high as possible. Berserker Fury for the attack speed, but you could use whatever you like here. Galvanized Elementalist plus a faction damage bonus for the slash damage. Primed Reach, of course, because, you know, Primed Reach is better than normal reach, and as we already figured out, we need to have rage on this bad boy here. And then Galvanized Steel for the crit damage mainly, but the additional crit chance is of course nice too, with Condition Overload for the base damage. However, in case you're running a setup that doesn't have any priming potential with different elements, you would swap this one here out for Primed Pressure Point. In the Arcane, I go for Melee Animosity because it synergizes very well with those Tennokai type of builds, making your shield throw very strong in the crit department. But of course, if you wanted to have more AoE, you could go for Melee Influence, or maybe even Melee Exposure if you wanted to add a lot of corrosive damage on top. And now the final build, and my personal favorite because it really plays into the strengths of this weapon, would be the Big Bada Boom build, where we use the Tak Lug exclusively for the shield throw to deal big blast AoE damage with, of course, Melee Influence. The way that this works is standard for a heavy attack build. We'll go with Galvanized Reflex for the initial combo, Sacrificial Steel because it gives us so much crit chance on heavy attacks, and then since we're mainly focusing on the Blast Force procs from the unique trait, we of course again go for Galvanized Elementalist plus a faction damage mod, whoever we're going up against. Primed Reach again because otherwise the shield is just omega cringe. Base damage, either Prime Pressure Point, or if you have a companion that does the elemental priming, go Condition Overload, you can exchange it however you like. Amalgam Organ Shatter for the crit damage and also the heavy attack wind-up speed, which comes in very handy. And finally, Voltaic Strike, because obviously we need to have some source of electricity in order to be able to trigger Melee Influence in the first place. Now, I personally had a lot of fun playing both the Melee Influenced Shield Throw build as well as the Tennokai one that does normal as well as Shield Throw attacks. But of course, you're free to build this weapon however you like, so if you have some other suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. But now, before we wrap it up for the day, I still have a little bit of a suggestion as to which things would harmonize well with this melee, and I want to take a minute to also mention these. First of all, if you want to go for the exclusive heavy attack build with melee influence, my recommendation would be to definitely go and use Ready Steel in the aura of your Warframe, because that will make it that your initial combo will be even higher than with Galvanized Steel alone. Next, because this is a blast focus build, you're really gonna deal devastating damage if you combine it with a Warframe that has a grouping ability, like for example Nidus. You also saw it throughout the video in the background. I tested this on Nidus too, and if you manage to group up a lot of enemies and throw the shield in, you're gonna deal absolute crazy damage. By the way, if you wanted to have a companion to help with the grouping, of course, Nautilus would be the first thing that comes to mind. And if you also want to know what the other event weapon, the Tomcat, can do, then you can find that out right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demoloid Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Anakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Linux User, Shadow Lockhart, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.